Hey, if your whole reaction to this scene revolves around the words mommy issues, I've got to yap at you for a sec. I made a TikTok on this subject that made some waves, and I thought it deserved a little bit of a deeper examination and some of the central themes and, some additional thoughts I've had since the episode aired, so I would love to get into it. Now, listen, for as much as I would love to say, oh my god, how dare they include a scene where a central character is forced to grapple with how disgusted he is for the first time in his life by the consequences of his own actions, I respect you too much to say that, so I won't. So what I will say instead is spoilers for House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 5, and I love this scene. I love this scene, I love this episode, I read the books, and I am not mad. Now, what I think is so great about this scene is that while yes, we are seeing a Daemon who is understanding for the first time ever on a very individual level that his actions have consequences, which are disproportionately experienced by the women in his immediate sphere of influence, he's also kind of disgusted by them, which I think is great. It's about time. Because finally this man is starting to understand that the lengths that he will go to secure power are kind of gross. But not only that, the lengths that he's going to are literally the actionable insights, building blocks, and line items which have propped up, maintained, and supported this dynasty's existence for generations in the first damn place. This, which grosses him out so much, is necessary to maintain the power structure he is vying so desperately to become the figurehead of. And I think that's just great writing. So I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination by any means to say that we're looking at a Daemon who is, yes, experiencing a pretty serious internal struggle, but we're also seeing a Daemon who is struggling to reconcile the consequences and the violence and the actions of an entire dynastic structure as a whole. A dynastic structure that by its very nature has demanded its participants, whether willing and freely offering their consent or not, to deliberately blur the line between platonic, familial, and romantic love for the sake of its own continued maintenance. Not only that, but also a structure that demands the subjugation of its women. Which is a whole hell of a lot to consider when you remember that there's no shortage of powerful dragon-riding Targaryen women. Well, yeah, you can fly a literal nuclear lizard at any time, but what's in your pants? Not only is that what I casually refer to as not a good look, it's also the reinforcement of the established themes laid down by Rhaenyra's narration in Season 1, Episode 1. Hey man, the only thing tearing down the House of the Dragon is itself, baby. And that's on media literacy, bitch. Now, Daemon's entire Season 2 arc up to this point revolves explicitly around his refusal to submit to Rhaenyra because she's a woman, which is why I think it's so interesting that we see him being very submissive to Alyssa in a very specific way, which really reinforces the fact that you could be the most dragon-riding badass bitch on the planet, but there's still only one tiny bed-sized arena within this entire dynastic structure wherein you are, allowed to really hold any control or power. When we see Daemon's comfort and enthusiasm for this melt away immediately into abject terror and disgust as soon as he realizes who this is. So you mean to tell me your whole life you've been fanboying for a power structure that has bent your family tree into a family wreath and you're still gonna have the audacity to dabble in a heaping helping of Madonna whore complex? Girl, get out of here. I love this scene, not only because it ties directly into Rhaenyra's monologue at the end of the episode and the consequences of Rook's rest, but it also gives us a way more practical insight into not only Daemon's undeniable insecurity, but also shines a very specific and very pointed light directly on the less sexualized aspects of his intimacy issues. Rhaenyra talks about how Alyssa was a dragon rider who wrote Meleys, who then was claimed by Rhaenys after Alyssa's passing. Rhae then goes on to discuss how furious Daemon was when he tried to claim Meleys and was rejected by her. Lost his mom, rejected by her dragon, mommy issues, am I right? But what was so compelling to me about this is the fact that despite generations of reinforced structural support, Daemon, a man at the head of House Targaryen, could not claim his mother's power. Despite knowing and loving her as the queen who never was, Daemon literally could not claim her power. That must have been absolutely maddening. But if you take another step back and re-examine this relationship dynamic specifically within the hypersexualized context in which we're seeing it, and this is something that I wish the showrunners had clarified a little bit better, is the fact that Daemon's parents were siblings. And not only were Alyssa and Balon siblings, but their parents, the old King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, were siblings as well. So that's like a incest triple threat we're looking at here. And what fascinates me, and what I actually haven't seen mentioned too much of before, is the fact that, to me at least, Alyssa here looks strikingly like a young Rhaenyra, which has really interesting implications, in my opinion, about their relationship dynamic moving forward. So, when incest is not a deal breaker, but the specifics of the biological relation is, and the analog for your disgust and horror and regret at the aforementioned specifics in the first place looks a whole heck of a lot like your niece wife, how could you ever fall into whatever potential for a, and heavy use on the quotation marks here, healthy and constructive relationship dynamic. I think people love to talk about how Rhaenyra is upheld by Daemon to a degree because she's essentially the last vestiges of the only person he ever loved outside of himself, is Viserys. So I can't help but wonder if this sudden shift in dichotomy and disgust with his own actions in relationship to this whole freaky sex dream might affect his unwillingness to allow her birthright. Could Daemon also ever want the only thing that Viserys really wanted, just to put his daughter on the throne? I don't know. Getting a little galaxy brain here. But when kind of cross-examining the nature of these relationships between Daemon and Viserys and Rhaenyra and Alyssa, I can't help but be reminded of the fact that Daemon could have usurped Viserys at any time. Their first spat in the throne room, Daemon didn't say, "I want to be king." He said, "You never made me your hand. You never allowed me to do my due diligence so I could consolidate and reinforce the power we have as a family." Daemon explicitly references his desire to do nothing more than return his house to its former greatness in regards to marrying Rhaenyra. So I think it's pretty fascinating that while we have two brothers effectively fighting for the same end goal in their own unique way, we have Daemon who's trying to do that in a way that frees him from the restrictiveness and lack of fundamental power as a second son, and the other one who is literally whitewashing the histories. Two brothers fighting to the same end, neither prepared to prevent or acknowledge the consequences of their own actions. They both want to be peak Targaryen, but want to do so without running the risk of any consequences. Okay, now, so this is to all the Oedipal complex misunderstanders and the folks who say, "Ugh, why did it have to be his mom?" Listen, I want to posit something to you. If we're going to examine this scene in relation to its thematic tie-ins with an infamous Greek tragedy, then we're going to have to treat it like one. The story of Oedipus calls down exactly the themes and hard-learned lessons that are central to Daemon's arc at this point in the story. The inevitability of suffering, fate versus free will, the weight of moral responsibility, hubris, and the supernatural, unshakable will of the gods. And a little bit of, well, what are the limits of human knowledge and how might that come to bite us in the ass in the end, So despite being a Targaryen nationalist, all we've seen of him so far has been not only wrapped up in classically Targaryen themes, traits, and characteristics, he's also been uniquely selective and pretty staunchly against the more supernatural side of Targaryen history. The whole omens and portents thing, am I right? So while we have Rhaenyra calling her and Daemon halves of a whole for their shared all fire, no blood magic traits, really, to me, he and Viserys make up the two supernatural and super violent figures necessary to complete the Targaryen equation as a whole. So what's really interesting to me is the fact that Alice Rivers is effectively holding up a mirror to Daemon's hubris in a way that doesn't exclusively serve his ego for the first time ever. He's being forced to not only examine the consequences of his own actions as an individual, but also he's being forced to reconcile the actions and violence of his entire house. Don't forget, she's for the people. So in addition to picking up on the fact that the only way to actually get this man to objectively take a look at the consequences of his own actions is by shining a very bright light on his vanity, he's also giving him a crash course in that, hey dummy, magic is real. It's not pretty, and it's honestly super weird that "she's my mom" is where you draw the line, but it's none of my business. So again, to everybody saying, "Oh, why his mom? Why his mom? Why sex with his mom?" The disgust, the terror, and the reconsideration of the length that Daemon will go to secure power of an empire that necessitates some pretty gross shit to exist from all parties involved is exactly the point. And if you like this analysis and you wish you can consume more media like it, I would highly recommend picking up The Monstrous Feminine by Barbara Creed for more interesting perspectives on how pretty much all horror is rooted in lmao, what of women. Don't subscribe, ugh.